Okay,
There you go.
there
Excuse
we
me.
go. So tonight we have Harry Lorusso, who was diagnosed with glioblastoma in March of 2019, at the age of 33, after going to the ER for what he thought was dehydration, but quickly learned it was a seizure. Collectively, with his support system, he decided that surgery would be the most important success driver in becoming an outlier of this disease. After an intense worldwide search for the right surgeon, the fate brought Harry to Dr. Amacular. I don't know.
Close, homuncular. Yeah.
Mocular. Not so ironically in Pittsburgh, where he resides. And then I think um we'll let you tell the rest of the story, Harry, but we're very excited to learn about your story and learn how you processed life and how you learned how to deal with everything that you were facing. So I am gonna unpin myself and turn it over to you.
Good. Yeah, Jen, thank you so much for the introduction. Really great to meet everyone. And, Jen mentioned questions into the chat. I'm completely open about my diagnosis, my journey. Nothing's out of bounds for me. If there's any questions that even come up during the conversation and you want to come off mute and jump in, I'm happy to have any sort of dialogue. Um, I think I'll go back to where Jen started to talk about, for me, um, 2019, I was 33 years old. And even prior to that, I was actually born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Um, Grew up in a household that prioritized academics and athletics. I went to a really great high school, a competitive high school down in South Florida that got me a full scholarship to a Division II school in West Virginia. I played football there at that college, and I always tell this story just because it emphasizes kind of quality of life I had before being diagnosed. I always maintained a pretty healthy lifestyle, and also it's what got me to Pittsburgh. I get the funniest looks around town when I tell people I'm from Fort Lauderdale. Not necessarily on days like this, but in about a month and a half, 2 months from now, when there's snow on the ground and it comes up in conversation that I'm from Florida, they ask me what the heck I'm doing in Pittsburgh. And, I think it all really played into my journey. After graduating from West Virginia Wesleyan, the closest airport was actually Pittsburgh. So I spent so much time here and I really fell in love with the city. But I never really knew what I was doing here. It was just kind of step by step. I was young. I was in my mid 20s, and I spent the first few years here getting comfortable. And at around 33, I ended up moving into the north side of the city, the Mexican War Streets. I met my girlfriend, who at 33, she became my fiance. We were engaged and we were living together in the north side. And it was a normal night for me, a March night. Finished up work. I went to the gym. Kind of as we touched on, up until this point, I never had more than a common cold, never broke a bone, never had stitches, which is actually really incredible to say at 33 years old. Went to the gym, came home, cooked dinner. I could tell you everything that I made that night, every ingredient that I used. And that kind of plays into the story as we go. But after dinner, I told my fiance at the time that, hey, I'm not feeling too good. I'm gonna go upstairs and just kind of rest for a minute. And I remember going up the stairs laughing because I got myself out of cleanup. I cooked this big extravagant meal, and I was so excited now that I didn't have to clean up. And as I was going upstairs, I started to kind of go from fatigue to a little bit of nausea. And in the moment, I couldn't remember where the bathroom was in the home that we own, and started to lose kind of clarity of the situation and the layout of our home. And I went to scream out for my fiance Dana, and I couldn't get the words out. And so I looked for kind of the closest pillar wall, and I was on the second floor of our home, and I found the wall and I leaned up against it, and I got really fortunate. My body was beginning to shut down, and my fiance Dana came up the stairs, saw me, and I think for my cancer journey and for many, this was a moment where everything started to move incredibly fast. Before I knew it, Dana got me down the stairs, got me into the car. Reason I told you we lived in the north side is our first stop was Allegheny General. We went right over to AGH, and I remember they put me right into an MRI, and it's amazing. You know, you shared it. They eventually diagnosed it as a seizure, but I never lost consciousness, and it's something that I'm incredibly grateful for because it gives me such perspective of the entire situation. Whereas most who have a seizure, especially leading up to a form of brain cancer, do lose consciousness. So I remember everything. It was pouring rain. My fiance, Dana, she put me into a wheelchair. She couldn't find anyone to help her. She pushed me up the ramp into the ER. They put me right into a MRI. Came out and they said, "Hey, we fear it's a brain tumor. We just don't know how severe." That's when I got my first 6 stitches. The next day, we went into a biopsy and they removed a portion of the tumor. And within 24 hours, they diagnosed it with glioblastoma. It was a grade 4 brain tumor. And, I remember laying in the hospital bed across from Dr. Yu, who was the surgeon at AGH at the time. And when I came to and he explained the diagnosis to me, I said, "Okay, well, what does remission look like?" And he said, "There's no such thing." And I said, "Okay, well, what does prognosis look like?" And he said, 12 to 14 months. And I turned to Dana, who was my fiance at the time, and my family was in the room. And I asked my family to leave the room, and I talked to her, and I said, "We're planning for this June wedding. I can't even imagine marrying into this situation." Right now we were two 33-year-olds, newly engaged, planning for a big wedding in June. And she looked me right in the eyes and said, "Not only are we getting married, we're getting married sooner." And a week later, we were married. And we decided to keep that June date out there for, an opportunity post-treatment, because we knew that was next in line to celebrate and spend time and, enjoy being at that point of life together. So, it was really great. I think, a commonality with most who are diagnosed with cancer, they look to what are the benefits that could outweigh some of obviously the negative that is associated with this form of disease. And for me, that's always been the sense of community. And before we even left the hospital, when I was diagnosed, we put our team together. It was my fiance, her sister, and my mother. And we said, "Okay, we were just given 12 to 14 months. What are we going to do to extend that? What is the most important thing that could provide me quality of life and longevity when it comes to extending my life expectancy?" And unanimously, we agreed that it was going to be the surgeon. We needed to find a surgeon who, keep in mind, I was 33 at the time. The average age of diagnosis for glioblastoma is 64 years old. So I was about half of the age, that typically most protocols are designed for. So, we were in search of a surgeon who was willing to be aggressive. We wanted to throw the kitchen sink at this tumor. Anything that they were willing to treat it with, we wanted. And, I think the most convenient, comfortable thing in that moment would have been just staying at AGH and saying, "We're here, let's do it, take it out." Instead, we took a little risk. We knew that we were willing to kind of challenge the norm, that my life was on the line. And, at this point in my life, I've talked to so many people who have truthfully felt like they've made the mistake by rushing into surgery rather than being selective with the surgeon. And I'm incredibly grateful for the people around me who gave me the option to, let's take a step back, let's slow down, let's go search for. And you mentioned a worldwide. We treat it like a job interview. We put together a Excel sheet of surgeons that specialized in removing glioblastomas, and we looked at Ohio, Pennsylvania, Houston, and in Europe and in France. We saw a surgeon there who's incredibly talented and aggressive with the type of tumor removals that they practice in. So, for me, it's twofold. UPMC was on the list for me of surgeons to interview. Dr. Nanduka Moncular was highly recommended. And I remember the day my wife, or fiance, her sister, my mother, and I walked into his office and we gave him the list. And he went through the list and he said, "Look, if I had your diagnosis and I couldn't remove my own tumor, there are a few people on this list that I would go to, but I know for certain that I could give you the best ability to have the longest possible life." And he just had a sense of confidence to him. It wasn't arrogance, but it was the type of person that our team looked at each other and said, "Okay, that's who we trust to remove this tumor." And coming up on 6 years later, I still talk to him monthly. We're incredibly good friends. We grew a great relationship. We went into UPMC looking for a trial. I think, if you're able to get on a trial study, it was something that we wanted to find, something innovative, something aggressive, something that was outside of the standard of care, and something that started at surgery. And here's a part, and with a lot of long-term survivors that I talk to, I do think luck at some point of the story comes into play. And here's where luck came into play for me. I walked into UPMC on a Tuesday to interview Dr. Amoncular, the surgeon, and it just so happened the day before, on Monday, UPMC was approved for a trial that was geared towards someone a bit younger who's diagnosed with this type of disease. And it was the perfect match for me. It started at surgery with an aggressive tumor removal. When the tumor was removed, they go into the tumor bed and they inject it with a virus that essentially distracts the remaining tumor cells. And then they hit it with your standard of care, which is, chemo and radiation, but they finish it with immune therapy. So when you look at the umbrella of drugs and therapies that could have been utilized in that situation, I went A to Z. I used pretty much everything that you could possibly after surgery. And my first scan post immune therapy, when my immune therapy round finished, came back no evidence of the disease. And I've scanned no evidence of disease for the last 5.5 years.
Wow.
Went from 12 to 14 months to an amazing, coming up on 6 years of no evidence of disease. And right now, I go into scans every 12 weeks. And, for us, we've really decided that we were going to, up into this point, take everything that the institutional hospital could give us. And that was the treatment plan, the protocol, which was, surgery, immune therapy, chemotherapy, radiation. But what can we complement that with? What could we do outside of the hospital to help enhance what they did when I was going through treatment? And, it was amazing. And I can give you a couple of different stories. Diet, for example. I immediately switched to a ketogenic diet. I did my own research in finding that at minimum, it is promoting a well-balanced, healthy diet. But it also enhances your ability to take on the benefits of the treatment. So I do feel that my body better accepted chemo. I refused to take the anti-nausea pills while taking chemo, and I didn't get sick once. I did a round of chemo in Italy, so I traveled while taking it, and not once did I get sick. And I give a lot of credit to the type of diet that I was on and the food I put into my body, and I believe it was better absorbed because of that. Likewise with radiation, I was going through radiation at the same time. The big thing for me was going against and challenging some of the things that the hospital wouldn't tell me. And I don't know if any of this is out of bounds, if I'm able to, am I able to share everything? Okay. So, I fought incredibly hard for my medicinal marijuana card. Um, Up until that point of my life, I never touched cannabis, THC, CBD, anything. But as our team did more research, we found that there is a lot of really strong studies out there of cannabinoids, the core of THC, that your body and your brain retains, going after remaining cancer cells. So I immediately started a regimen of THC, CBD, and I had a incredibly old, and I say old in age and thinking, oncologist who fought me tooth and nail. He said, "You don't need it. You don't need it. You don't need it." And I said, "Yes, I do. I want it. I believe in the research behind it." And this was us combating against the system because we felt like it was an outlet to help save my life. Um, from that point on, when I was approved for my medicinal marijuana card, I have used THC every single night before going to bed. Um, and I'm completely open about dialogue with this. It's an unbelievably exploratory process. They don't say, "Hey, you have glioblastoma. This is the type of THC you should take." I had to do my own research, as I did with diet and most other health and nutrition and vitamins and supplements, but I give a lot of credit as to why I'm still here because of this piece. Um, and I think it's twofold. I think it's the ability of the cannabinoids and the THC to combat remaining cancer cells. Sure, I think that's one. But I also think that in anyone's cancer journey, and even not, even for your typical human, I think rest is the most important thing we can give our body. A good night's sleep heals us. I do believe that. And that is why I utilize THC, CBD right before going to bed at night. It settles my mind. I'm able to slow down. It puts the cannabinoids into my body. And when I wake up, I'm completely refreshed and I have no carryover. And I'll tell you, something that really stood out to me is a lot of people who go through this, kind of the health and wellness side of the UPMC channel, at least, are pushed to smoking it. I chose pill form. I didn't like inhaling, it wasn't for me. So I found a pill form, which is a 1-to-1 wellness pill of THC CBD. And it's incredibly beneficial. And, especially while going through chemo. If you don't want to use an anti-nausea, which I didn't want to use, I was able to use this to balance out the nausea that's created by both radiation and chemo, and it was incredibly beneficial for me and my journey still to this day. So, major part of my regimen. Um, I think something that is really unique, that again, and I don't want to sound ultra rebellious, but that was the big thing for me was I would listen to every single thing that I was told in the hospital, but then I would also think about the other side of it. I would think about what the system told me, and then I would think about everything else and what is the opposite, and how could I benefit by maybe looking into that a bit. And I was approached with everything from, "Are you going to go back to work?" And at 33, when someone says, "Are you ever going to work again?" That's an interesting comment. And it was hard to digest. And I was back to work within 2 months, and I haven't stopped working since. Are you ever going to drive again? I never stopped driving outside of, once I was outside of treatment, I drove, and I made it a point to, keep my life as normal as possible. And driving was obviously part of that. But the most important part was becoming a parent. So there is no playbook at any age while you're going through cancer treatment to become a parent. So this kind of ties back into surrounding yourself with people who, when you are digesting this type of news, this type of diagnosis, and you can't think for yourself, let alone do the research needed early on to process and handle the decision making, having people there to support you and to help guide you in those decisions is crucial. Um, my sister-in-law came to me about 3 days into diagnosis before I started treatment, and she pulled me aside. And probably the most uncomfortable conversation you would ever have with a sister-in-law. She said, "I think you need to bank some samples at the sperm bank." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? I would never imagine that in a million years, especially at 33 years old." And she said, "There is a chance down this journey at some point, you're going to want to become a parent. And I think you would, the research I've done promotes this." So I went back to the hospital and I said, "We're thinking about doing this." They said, "You're crazy, this severe of a diagnosis. I can't believe you would even consider." They use the word responsibility, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, through IUI, which is the process of taking my sample and utilizing it through a medicinal process with my wife. 2 years into treatment, we were able to welcome my first child, who's now 3 years old. And I have a 3-year-old boy, Wiley, who is the most incredible little amazing man that I've ever met. And even more so because we were essentially laughed at, or kind of disciplined on responsibility when we brought it to the table that we were going to become parents. And flash forward into the future. Um, Once all of the drugs and the chemo and the radiation, we hit the timeline where everything was out of my system, and we were able to reproduce naturally. My wife and I were able to, hit that milestone, and we have an 8-month-old daughter, Layla, who was born 8 months ago, and is the most amazing, beautiful, healthy little girl, and just becomes such a great part of our journey through cancer, and especially when you're told that that might not be an option. And the reason I share my two children is, when I was at the hospital, and it was still at AGH, and we were talking about longevity and life expectancy and what's going to be most important. When you're incredibly healthy and then you're told you have 12 to 14 months to live. Um, for me, to combat this disease for the longest amount of time, I thought it was incredibly important to have a finish line. Um, Somewhere when, and everyone knows this, that you're going to have the bad days where you think about the prognosis. And, I coughed weird today. Is my cancer back? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but that anxiety that comes along with the disease, I knew that I was going to have a finish line to take my head to, that said, okay, if this is what winning looks like, if there's no cure for the disease, there's no such thing as remission. I needed a finish line. I needed a place to go in the bad days and say, okay, if I can make it to this point, we did it. We made it. And this was a good run for us. And, initially when my son was born, for me, that was holding his grandchild, or holding his child, my grandchild, because I knew that if my son Wiley has a child, that means I raised a healthy, happy young man who was able to grow up and meet their significant other, eventually have a child of their own that I was able to hold and meet. And that probably puts me 33, 35 years out in beating this. And I won't say surviving it, I'd say beating it. And that was always the goal for me. And I use that in my darkest times, on the days that I get out of bed and I feel off, or something doesn't feel right, or I have a big scan coming up and I worry about the scan and this anxiety builds. I start to really zoom in on what that moment would look like for me holding his child. And that usually brings me to the other side of any sort of fear or anxiety. And it's only been able to multiply since having my daughter, to the point where I already have the song picked out that I plan to have our first dance with, or walk her down the aisle. And, I truly believe in writing things down and making them come true. And, my finish line with Wiley and my daughter Layla, I put pen to paper and I look at it almost every single day. and the goal for me is to get to that point. And no such thing as remission, no cure. That's completely fine with me as long as I make it to those 2 points in my children's life, and I strive for that every single day. Um, Jen, what else? What else could I share? I'm really open to. I could tell you actually, Jen, if you want to talk about outlier a little bit, I would like that. So, um, I recently, and I do a lot with the cancer community now. When I was in treatment, my wife and I started a nonprofit called the Outlier Fund. Someone very close to me went on Google, which I don't recommend for anyone diagnosed with cancer. But they Googled glioblastoma and they saw 12 to 14-month life expectancy. And they're telling me this over the phone. And there was an awkward pause. And they said, okay, well, I guess you're going to have to be an outlier. And in that moment, it was silent. And I found so much inspiration by that that I wanted to pass it on to others. So I started the Outlier Fund. We are a nonprofit built to bring hope to the cancer community, specifically brain cancer, and raise funds for necessary research. This has led me to working with a ton of amazing organizations like Cancer Bridges, meeting people like Jen. My surgeon, the only job in the world he would leave UPMC for was University of Pennsylvania, and he took over as head of neuro at UPenn. So I go there frequently. I just spoke to their tumor board recently, sharing my journey and helping fund and make donations to certain projects that they have there going on in their labs. I say all this because I think a commonality amongst long-term survivors, and a specific long-term survivor I have in mind, was diagnosed with the same cancer that I have. He was, told 12 to 14 months, and he just hit 18 years. And for him and I, the common ground was a deeper purpose, finding a deeper purpose than we had pre-diagnosis. Is that helping people? Is that being closer to your family? Is it helping yourself and changing your habits, attaching yourself to a deeper purpose to keep you moving forward? Is the biggest commonality that I have come across with all of the cancer survivors that I've been able to connect with over the last 5.5 years. I think that mixed with a finish line, knowing what the short term looks like with the deeper purpose, and knowing what the long term looks like with the eventual goals that you would like to achieve, I think is critical. And I get a lot of I guess you could say heat or dirty looks for this perspective, but I share it often. And it's amazing, not only, and if she was in the room, she'd say it to you too, my now wife, Dana. I love when we transition to the point where I no longer have to call her my fiance for these. She's my wife, Dana. We've been married for 5 years, but she would tell you the same thing, that if we had the option, if someone sat in front of us, and I know this might not sound true, but deeply it is, to go back and change this diagnosis, this journey, we wouldn't. And it's such a combination of fulfillment, of purpose. We were two young kids with really no direction prior to this, and for us, it gave us such a sense of purpose. It gave us such a sense of how valuable life is, appreciation for time and how important our time is here together, the ability to be present. Couldn't tell you before, right after college, I could be pulled in a million directions and not focus on what was right in front of me. Now I have such clarity to be able to focus on the most important things that, I surround myself with: my wife, my children, my family, and, have such values for what really means most in this life. So, the second half of that is the people it brought into my life. Um, Other survivors and people who've gone down the cancer journey, my surgeon, my medical team, We meet new people every day who have been impacted by this disease that we talk to often. And, I would say our community has just continued to grow, especially through the 501(c)(3), the nonprofit. And we've been able to just meet so many incredible people that if you said, okay, you could go back and change this, but you would never have met them, they would never have been part of your life. I don't think we would have. I think we would keep things exactly how they are. And I know that's a unique perspective, and probably against, what most beliefs are. But it is deeply how we feel, and something that we're both proud of. Um, I want to talk briefly because I know you talked about Fitbits and steps opening up, the conversation. Um, Physical health and wellness was incredibly important to me. Um, when my tumor was removed, it was on the nerve that affects my vision on my right eye. And when I left the hospital, I had a really hard time getting my brain, eyes, hands, and feet to work together. And I was walking through East Liberty, and I looked up to a second floor of a building, and I saw a boxing gym, boxing bags and boxing gloves and a boxing ring. And I said to my wife, I think I'm going to try that. And she said, absolutely not. You're out of your mind. That's the same thing that when I eventually told my oncologist and medical team that I was going to try that, they said, you're crazy. And I said, no, if it's in the right setting, it's non-contact, what other, athletic movements could get my hands, brain, feet, body working together than throwing punches on a bag. And 2 weeks out of the hospital, I still had stitches in my head from where the tumor was removed. I reached out to Yarden Brantley, who is the owner of Shape Training in East Liberty, is the gym that I go to 3 days a week till this point in my life. And I said, look, this is a situation I'm in. Just had a incurable tumor removed from my brain, and I'm struggling with this physically. I still have stitches in my head. And he wrote me back within an hour, and he said, be here tomorrow. And I was there at 9 a.m. the next day. And from that moment on, we put a regimen in place to build back where I lacked. Get my hands, brain, feet, body working together. And, even my mind, I didn't know this about the sport of boxing, but every punch has a number attached to it. So, to get cognitive function working again, ones and twos and threes and fours and remembering these cadences and moving your body to match them, I found so beneficial. And I'll tell you the second half of that. And Yarden, again, the story goes on about your support system and your community became such a crucial part of my community. Um, I think physically, it's so important to have someone that you partner with that keeps you accountable for going through those activities. If I wasn't paired with Yarden, I don't think I would get out of bed and go and box and walk and run and lift weights and swim. Being partnered with him put a sense of accountability into my life in a time where I didn't want to move. I didn't want to get out of bed. Um, that was his relationship was so important. And the second half of that is when people hear cancer, most often they treat you as a patient. Um, I surrounded myself with the team there at his gym that not once did they ever treat me like a patient. I walked into that building and I was there to get better. And there was no, oh, he needs to go, slow or change this. They built something based off of, they tailored a program to where I was at the time, but it wasn't the aspect of when I walked into UPMC and was put into a wheelchair and immediately to get a gown on. I felt like a patient. I was being treated like a patient, and I didn't want that. I wanted my independence back, and I got that when I, joined Shape Training and fell into a program that was tailored specifically to me and to some of the deficits I saw from the cancer experience that I had. Jen, I think that really kind of sums up my story for you.
Okay, hold on. We'll move into the question.